The evening was dressed in velvet and gold as the most exclusive restaurant in the city prepared for its guest of honor. Every server knew the rules. When the billionaire CEO came, everything had to be flawless. He was a man of power, feared in boardrooms and revered in the press, a figure who thrived on control. Tonight, he arrived with his usual presence, sharp suit, icy stare, and an entourage that parted the restaurant like a wave splitting the sea. The maitre d' scrambled, offering him the best seat while the staff hurried into perfect alignment. Among them stood a young black waitress, quiet but observant. She noticed the way the CEO dismissed those around him as if they were invisible, mere background to his grandeur. He ordered a steak, nothing more, nothing less. His expectation was simple, perfection. But as the order left his lips, something shifted. The waitress, steady and composed, carried more than just his meal on her tray. She carried a secret, one that could shatter the polished armor he wore. As she prepared his table, her fingers tucked a small folded note beneath the edge of his plate. The billionaire was used to attention, but not like this. He had no idea that the moment he touched his steak, his world would tilt. What seemed like just another lavish dinner was about to become the beginning of his unraveling. And with the note waiting under his plate, the countdown to his reckoning had quietly begun. The billionaire lifted his silver fork, cutting into the perfectly seared steak with precision. For a moment, all was as it had always been, indulgence, power, and silence. But then, as his napkin shifted, the folded slip of paper slid into view. His sharp eyes narrowed, scanning the room as if to see who dared interrupt his meal. He unfolded it, expecting perhaps a clumsy request for money or an admirer's desperate plea. But instead, his hands froze mid-motion. The words carved into the paper were sharp and deliberate. Not the trembling handwriting of someone beneath him, but the steady script of a woman with courage. The note referenced something he thought buried, something no one else could have known. The billionaire's chest tightened. The world outside his corner table seemed to fade into a blur of candlelight and murmured conversations. Suddenly, the steak before him tasted like ash. The waitress had returned to serving nearby tables, her expression calm as though she had handed him nothing more than a napkin. But the note's message struck harder than any public scandal. It was not a threat for money. It was something far more dangerous. It was knowledge. And knowledge, in the wrong hands, could strip him of everything he had built. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt small. He glanced at the waitress again, and she did not flinch. She knew she was daring him to react, and he could not hear. Not now. His meal sat untouched as the weight of the words pressed into his chest. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, the noise of the restaurant muffled against the roar of his thoughts. He replayed the words from the note, each one cutting deeper than the last. It spoke of a name, a place, and a decision he had made years ago. Decisions that had crushed lives, erased voices, and left him richer, untouchable. At least, that's what he had believed. But the waitress, how did she know? She moved between tables with the grace of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Yet her silence screamed louder than the clinking glasses. Every glance she gave him felt like an accusation. Every step a reminder that his past was no longer buried. He tried to piece it together. Years ago, in pursuit of empire, he had closed factories, cut jobs, and silenced dissent. One community, in particular, had suffered most. And now, staring at her, he realized the truth. The waitress was not just a stranger. She was connected to that community. One of the countless lives his empire had crushed beneath its weight. This was no coincidence. She wasn't here to serve him, she was here to confront him, not with shouting, not with a scene, but with a note. A note that held the kind of power money couldn't silence. The billionaire felt his palms dampened, a rare vulnerability. He was used to control, but now control was slipping through his fingers. The waitress passed his table again, her eyes meeting his. She did not need to say a word. He understood. This was only the beginning. The billionaire excused himself from the table. Clutching the note in his pocket like contraband, he slipped into the restroom, staring at his reflection in the polished mirror. His jaw was tight, his face pale under the dim light. He had faced hostile investors, cutthroat competitors, even political storms, but never this. Never a single slip of paper capable of undoing it all. He reread the words again, slower this time. They weren't just a reminder of his past decisions. They were personal. The note mentioned her father, a worker he had fired during a ruthless downsizing. A man who had begged for mercy, not for himself, but for his family. And when the billionaire had refused, that man's life had spiraled. The note told of a daughter who had watched her father's spirit break. A daughter who had grown up carrying that wound. The billionaire's chest constricted. It was her. This waitress, standing just outside, had carried her family's pain into adulthood. And tonight, she had delivered it back to him, without shouting, without demanding, just a folded note that forced him to face the truth. He splashed cold water on his face, but it couldn't wash away the guilt rising inside him. The mirror showed a man of wealth and power, but he no longer recognized the reflection. For the first time in decades, he felt stripped of his armor. He knew he couldn't ignore this, not anymore. Returning to his table, the billionaire felt the weight of every step. The steak had cooled, untouched, the air heavy with unspoken tension. His entourage laughed and drank, oblivious to the storm unraveling in their midst, but he couldn't join them, his gaze fixed on the waitress, who moved with quiet certainty. He knew what was at stake. He could dismiss her, use his power to crush her as he had crushed so many before, but something inside him shifted. That note had not asked for money or vengeance. It had reminded him of humanity, something he had long forgotten. The billionaire tapped his fingers against the table, his mind racing. Redemption or denial. He could continue pretending, bury the past deeper, or he could face it. For years he had bought silence with wealth, but tonight a simple handwritten note had silenced him instead. The waitress returned to his table one last time, refilling his glass. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but everything was said. She was waiting not for an apology, not even for acknowledgement, but for him to choose what kind of man he would be after this night. And he knew his decision would not just change her life, it would change his own. The billionaire stood, the note still in his hand. For once, his departure wasn't marked by arrogance but by humility. He walked past the crowded tables, past the Moto D, and paused at the door. His eyes turned back toward the waitress, who remained calm, watching. She had forced him to see himself, not through the eyes of shareholders or headlines, but through the eyes of those he had destroyed. That night he didn't return to his penthouse or his empire. He went home to silence, the kind that gnawed at him. The note stayed on his desk, a constant reminder. And in the weeks that followed, whispers spread. Factories reopened. Communities received unexpected aid. Scholarships were funded, and doors opened for families who had long been left in the dark. It wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt money. It was something heavier, a reckoning. The billionaire began to rebuild, not his empire, but himself. The waitress never saw him again, but she didn't need to. Her note had done its work. The man who once devoured a stake in power had been stopped cold, not by scandal, not by rivals, but by the truth from a black waitress who refused to be silent, and with a single folded piece of paper, she had changed everything. End.